Morning, everybody. It's Monday, February 1st. We're in the middle of a beautiful snowstorm here in Connecticut. I hope you guys are staying warm and maybe getting a chance to go outside and run around in the snow with puppies or friends or siblings or whatever fun is available for us in this weird pandemic life. Maybe classmates if you're on campus. Um, so just a few things to get us started this week. I'm actually going to talk quickly about three separate things in this short video this morning on Monday to get the week started. First, there's a question, and I think it's a good question because I wasn't clear about it when I set the course up, a question about whether you should be responding to the class on the discussion threads on Canvas or on the Google Doc. I think the answer to that, and I'm still sort of figuring out exactly how those two platforms will work together over the course of the semester. But for now, at least, let's do most of our conversation on the discussion threads on Canvas. I think that's easier and a little bit more, it's easier to organize, the comments of 25 students plus me. The Google Doc will be primarily stuff that I will provide for you, which as a kind of outline or class notes each week that I'll put up for you, and you can add to it or ask questions on it if you want. But just so that we don't have 25 people writing on the same, or 26, I guess, people writing on the same document, let's for now have most of the conversation on Canvas, and the notes on the Google Doc will mostly come from me. And if we want to change that over the course of the semester, we might change it. But for now, let's do it that way. Second, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the opening paragraphs of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and Rowling's Harry Potter series. And there's a couple really good comments on this from students already. And I do remind you that you should always read your classmates' posts. Don't just wait for me to tell you what I think, because there's really great work being done already by some people who've gotten early to the posting, and you can learn a lot from your classmates in addition to what you might be able to learn from me. So I wanted to talk here about the relationship between sort of nostalgia or utopianism in Tolkien and critique or kind of a critical, more aggressive sense in Rowling. And I think that it's definitely true that Rowling is thinking about Tolkien when she writes her book, or her series, I guess. And I want to talk a little bit about how this works. So in the opening of Tolkien, we are set in Hobbiton in the Shire, in this kind of idealized utopian pastoral place where hobbits live, sort of sheltered from the concerns of the world. And one of the ways to describe the whole story of the Lord of the Rings is that a bunch of sheltered hobbits find out how dangerous and scary and significant are the things that are going on in the world, and they figure out a way to contribute and help and fix it, and then eventually come back to their beautiful sheltered place. There is a way in which this is an allegory of Tolkien's own life, living primarily in Oxfordshire and Oxford, England, as an academic, but also serving in the trenches in World War I. It's not an allegory, but Tolkien's wartime experience is important, I think, to understanding the relationship between the beautiful and cherished home in the Shire and the dangerous and violent world that is outside of it. So just a couple things about Tolkien's language when he describes Hobbiton. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. I think the word 111st, which is a wonderfully kind of Tolkien-esque coinage, right? It's a little bit of a made-up word. We know what it means. It means 111. It's an exaggerated version of a word we might normally hear. And that is part of Tolkien's structure. He wants to take things that we already know, country living, wealthy, slightly eccentric men living in their houses in the country, which is Bilbo Baggin in Bag End in the Shire, and he wants to make them just slightly more magical, slightly more idealized than they might be in a sort of realistic novel. And I think that sense of wonder, that sense of beauty, that sense of a kind of utopian perfection is really important to Tolkien. He's fundamentally, I think, a nostalgic writer who locates some of these idealized moments in a kind of a fantasy version of the past, a version before industry, before mechanical factory production and things like this and also before mechanized warfare like the kind that he experienced in the trenches in World War I, and that his understanding of the good old days, we might say, is really important, I think, to how we understand the Lord of the Rings. Moving over to Harry Potter, writing, a little bit more than a half century later, we have this really sharp sense of critique. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were very proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. And that word normal is so sharp and so critical. Like we know that we're supposed to hate the Dursleys even before we figure out why, although we can almost see in this the pride they take in their normalcy, their refusal to step outside of the bounds of a kind of normal, conventional, relatively boring life is really important to Rowling. We are in, the kind of the tension and the struggle between Harry and his foster parents is really important. It's the place we start when Harry's living in the cupboard under the stairs, and to a certain extent, we never quite get outside of it. Although we might talk about the relationship between, there's two sets of villains in the Harry Potter books. There's the Dursleys, who are the conventional, boring step parents, and then there's Voldemort, who's the super evil monster, Dark Lord kind of person. And like I always feel like in some ways the Dursleys are worse. In some ways the Dursleys are confining and containing in a way that, Voldemort at least is a magician. And part of the joy of the Harry Potter books is that it's a world in which things are possible, even if they're bad things. All right, so we'll talk more about both of those things. The other thing I wanted to do, and this is the third little bit of the YouTube for this morning, is I want to remember that even though these are books that I think many of us deeply love, and I definitely include myself on this. I as a child, I read The Lord of the Rings obsessively. I've probably been through the Lord of the Rings, I don't know, 15 times at least. And I watched all the movies when they came out, and I complained about things I think they got wrong, but I also loved them and watched them again and again. And I had the same experience reading Harry Potter, mostly to my children and with my children when they were growing up. And so I think it's important for us to remember that these great, emotionally powerful series get lots of things wrong. And in particular, one of the things that I want to talk about and be open about is the racism and the sexism, which really colors and disfigures both sets of books. Tolkien has very few major women characters. Most of the women are these kind of idealized, etherealized elf figures like Galadriel, or like he basically is deeply interested in some ways in female experience, and I think that's just a part of his, mid 20th century misogyny and sexism. He's also a deeply racist thinker. He understands certain races as fundamentally good and other races as fundamentally bad. The race of humans is actually the ambivalent ones. There are good ones and bad ones. While all the elves are good, all the orcs are bad. Humans are in the middle. But I think that the kind of understanding of racial types really disfigures his. It doesn't mean we can't read these books. It doesn't mean we can't be interested in them. It doesn't even mean that we can't love them. I still love them. But I think it's really important to recognize that. And although Rowling, I think, sets herself up to criticize the kind of uh, idealization that Tolkien has for sort of normal society. And she clearly is interested in having powerful, smart, active female characters, of whom Hermione is only one of like quite a few. I think she actually falls into a lot of the same kind of racist and sexist and even anti-Semitic tropes that Tolkien does. And we'll talk about this maybe in some detail as we go through the some of the Harry Potter books. But the current controversy, which I imagine some of you guys already know about, in which Rowling herself has become publicly involved in sort of attacking. Trans women in the UK. I think that actually it's like, on the one hand, it's like really bad to see a writer whose works are important to you get involved in these nasty political controversies and to behave really in cruel ways, which I think is what she's doing. But I also think there's a lot in Harry Potter that is already still thinking in types, still thinking about the a kind of fundamental, like Harry is good because he's good, but he's also good because he's descended from the right family. Like she has a lot of trouble, I think, getting out of some of that, some of that racialized and ethnic thinking. So we'll talk more about this as we go forward. Thanks.